never thought I'd see my wife the way I did that day. Let me set the scene because honestly, I need to get this all down before I lose my mind. Claire had always been the organized type. Obsessed with her phone, her laptop, her planner, the woman kept folders for everything. I mean, color-coded, alphabetized, labeled the works. I'd always joked she could be planning a heist and I'd never find out. Turns out I wasn't as far off as I thought. It started on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Claire had gone out for errands, saying she'd be a while. So I'm sitting there, minding my business, when I realized I needed a document she'd filed a while back. She'd stored it on our shared laptop, and since she wasn't home, I figured I'd just get it myself. I knew her filing system like the back of my hand, or so I thought. I click through her folders, find the one I need, but right as I'm about to open it, my eye catches something else. A folder on the desktop, right under vacation pics and household bills. It's labeled, in the same tidy font, How to Make a Husband a Cuckold. Now, I'd always known Claire had a strange sense of humor. But this? My heart froze. Part of me thought, no way, it's probably some weird article she saved. A joke. But something in my gut twisted, and curiosity took over. So I opened it. Inside, I found screenshots, messages, drafts of emails, notes, photos, step by step. She'd laid out a map for exactly how to string someone along, how to keep them clueless, how to live a double life right under their nose. And it wasn't just vague advice. No, this was personal. She'd written notes about me. Make sure he thinks it's work stress. Read one line. Tell him he's paranoid if he starts asking questions, said another. At that point, I started scrolling faster, feeling this sick pressure in my chest like I couldn't breathe fast enough. This folder wasn't some article or joke. She had a playbook, a whole damn manual on how to make sure I stayed in the dark. Then I saw it. A message exchange with some guy named Trent. I didn't even know a Trent. But the texts, God, the texts. It was like watching a car crash you can't look away from. Flirting, dates, inside jokes I'd never heard before, and all kinds of details about how she kept everything hidden. I sat there, numb, just staring at the screen, but I couldn't stop myself from scrolling through every disgusting message. Claire and this Trent guy had been carrying on for months, and it wasn't just innocent flirting. There was a whole world they'd built together behind my back. There were dates to places I'd never been with her, fancy restaurants, weekend getaways. She even talked about him meeting her friends, telling them he was a close colleague. Each new message felt like a punch to the gut. But the worst was seeing the way she'd talk about me. She'd mock the little things I did around the house, stuff I thought made her happy. Apparently, I was predictable, easy to keep in check, and too clueless to ever suspect a thing. The worst line, though? He's so busy trying to be a good husband, he doesn't even notice how much fun I'm having on the side. I couldn't stand to read it, but I couldn't stop, either. The messages shifted from plans and jokes to detailed descriptions of what they did together. It was like a checklist, places they'd go, things they'd try. I could practically feel my heart breaking, but rage was burning through me too. All this time, I'd been bending over backward to keep her happy, to give her a good life, and she was laughing about it with Trent. When I'd finally seen enough, I just sat there in our silent living room, listening to the rain against the window. I felt like I was outside my own life, watching everything I thought was real just dissolve. After a few minutes, I heard her car pull into the driveway. She walked in like it was any other day, smiling, dripping wet from the rain, calling out, "Hey, I brought wine and some snacks. Let's have a cozy night in." Just hearing her voice hit me like a shock. I waited until she was in the kitchen, putting things away, and then I spoke up, trying to keep my voice calm. "Claire," I said, "where were you just now?" She barely looked up from unpacking. "Oh, just errands. Had to pick up some things for work." The lie rolled out so easily that I almost believed her. Almost. I kept my voice steady. "Claire, who's Trent?" For a split second, her hand froze over the counter. But she recovered quickly, rolling her eyes. "Trent? Oh, come on. Babe, he's just a friend from work. Why? Are you getting jealous?" She laughed it off, but there was this sharpness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, like she was sizing me up, testing me. I took a deep breath and pulled out the laptop, opening the folder without saying another word. Her smile dropped. In a second, The color drained from her face as she looked at the screen, and for the first time, I watched the mask slip. This was no innocent friendship. No harmless misunderstanding. She knew exactly what I'd found. At Claire's eyes flicked between me and the screen. Her face pale as if she'd been caught in some high-stakes crime scene rather than her own kitchen. I didn't say a word. I just let her take in everything I'd seen. The texts, the photos, her twisted how-to guide for making a fool out of me. I could feel my hands shaking, but I kept my face steady, waiting to see what she'd do. "Okay," she finally said, drawing out the words slowly. Then she laughed. A nervous, forced little sound that bounced around the room. This isn't what it looks like, you know?" She ran her fingers through her hair, putting on a show of exasperation, like I was the one making things complicated. "Oh, really?" I replied, my voice icy. "It looks like you're having an affair with some guy named Trent. It looks like you've got a whole guide on how to lie to my face. And it looks like you find it all pretty hilarious." She threw her hands up, still trying to laugh it off. No, you're overreacting. Look, Trent's just a friend, and that folder, that was just a joke. My friends and I thought it'd be funny to put something like that together. We're always joking about how clueless men can be. Don't take it so seriously." Her tone was dripping with fake innocence. But she didn't fool me. "Claire," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "If it's a joke, then where are the punchlines? Where's the part where you tell your friends it's all pretend? Because from what I'm looking at, you've got detailed instructions on exactly how to keep me in the dark." Funny how none of that sounds like a joke to me. I could see her panicking now, grasping at straws. "Fine," she huffed, her tone snapping from sweet to cold in a split second. "So maybe it's not a joke. Maybe I needed someone who actually listened to me. Trent understands me in ways you never did. All you do is work, try to fix things around the house. As if that's all it takes to keep a woman happy." I was stunned. This wasn't remorse, or even a hint of guilt. It was defiance, like somehow I'd driven her to this. "I work to make a life for us," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "I thought we were on the same team." Claire just scoffed, crossing her arms. "Maybe if you hadn't been so boring, I wouldn't have needed excitement elsewhere," she said, her words as sharp as glass. "I wanted someone who treated me like a woman, not like some routine checklist in a marriage." I could feel something inside me snap. It was like I'd been seeing Claire through this rosy lens for years. But now, all I could see was the stranger standing in front of me, completely unfazed by the pain she was causing. "You know what?" I said, feeling a mix of rage and heartbreak rising in my throat. "I'd rather be boring and loyal than whatever the hell this is. And if you're so unhappy here, maybe you should go find your excitement somewhere else." She rolled her eyes again, sneering. "Maybe I will." In that moment, I felt like I was talking to a stranger. Someone who looked like my wife but was colder, sharper, a version of her I'd never seen. As I stared at her, I realized this was no misunderstanding, no moment of weakness. This was calculated. She had chosen to hurt me, to lie, and then to mock me for it without a second thought. Claire held her ground, her arms crossed, eyes unblinking, like she'd been waiting to say every horrible thing that had just come out of her mouth. And that smug, careless attitude she wore. It was the same look she had in those messages to Trent. It was like she'd transformed right in front of me, shedding the person I thought I knew. I couldn't just let this go. I needed to get to the bottom of how deep this betrayal went. "How long, Claire?" I asked, my voice thick with the weight of it all. "How long have you been playing me?" She shrugged, completely unfazed. "Since the start of the year, if you have to know. And before you ask, yes, he's been worth every minute." Her smile was cold, daring me to react, like she wanted me to break down right in front of her. The cruelty behind her words was deliberate, like she'd been waiting to throw it all in my face. "Why?" I managed to ask, though every word felt like it was scraping my throat raw. "Why go through all this? Why write out a whole guide on making me feel like an idiot?" She actually laughed at that, shaking her head. "Oh, come on. Don't act so innocent," she shot back, her voice sharp with a twisted kind of satisfaction. "It wasn't just about you. Trent and I had fun with it, seeing how long it would take before you even noticed something was off. And I guess now we know." Huh. It was like she'd ripped my heart out and tossed it between them like a toy. She kept going, explaining every detail with this detached amusement, like she was recounting a harmless prank. You're always so focused on doing things right, on making everything perfect. It's boring, predictable. With Trent, I felt alive, like I could be someone else for a change. Not the wife who has to play house every day. There it was, the truth she'd been hiding in that twisted folder. She wasn't just cheating. She was enjoying the game of it. The thrill of making me a fool, treating my love and trust like nothing more than background noise in her private escapade. And still, part of me couldn't let go. So what was the plan then? I asked, the words barely escaping me. String me along until you got bored with him, too? She rolled her eyes as if I was the one being unreasonable. The plan was to keep my options open. Okay? She snapped, her tone laced with sarcasm. I was going to see how things played out. Maybe we'd work it out, maybe not. Why limit myself? You had no idea this was going on. So it's not like it was hurting you.
Ist daher, stunned.
Not hurting me? I repeated, struggling to hold back the fury threatening to explode. Claire, you lied to my face every day. You built a relationship behind my back. You even bragged about it. And you think that didn't hurt me? She shrugged again, completely indifferent. And in that moment, I realized I'd never felt this alone in my entire life. I took a step back, feeling the weight of her words, the full extent of her betrayal hitting me like a tidal wave. She had no remorse, no second thoughts. If anything, she looked annoyed that I'd found out, like I'd inconvenienced her somehow. I thought back to everything we'd built together. The house, the dreams, the quiet moments that had felt so real, and saw them all crumble, burned to ash by her indifference. In that moment, it was as if I'd woken up from a dream I'd been clinging to for years, only to find a nightmare waiting on the other side. I thought I'd known Claire, but the woman standing in front of me now was a stranger with no trace of the love we once shared. The silence between us felt thick and suffocating. Claire was watching me, her gaze unflinching, almost bored, as if she were waiting to see what my next move would be. There was no guilt in her eyes, no regret, just a cold, indifferent satisfaction, like she'd won some game only she had been playing. And as I stood there, I realized she was expecting me to back down, to plead or beg or, who knows, maybe even apologize for not being exciting enough. She wanted me to feel small. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I took a breath, steadying myself. All right, Claire, I said slowly. If you're so bored with this predictable life, let's make things real exciting. How about you pack your things tonight and find somewhere else to stay? Her face tightened for the first time. Excuse me? She let out a scoff, crossing her arms. So that's it? You're going to throw everything away just because I needed a change? I couldn't help but let out a laugh, a bitter sound that filled the room. I'm the one throwing things away? Do you even hear yourself? Claire, you've spent months lying, sneaking around, mocking me to some guy like I'm a fool. And you still don't think this is on you. She glared, eyes flashing, and her voice sharpened. You know what? Fine, I'll leave. But don't think I'm the only one who's done something wrong here. Okay? You're the one who made things so suffocating. You always wanted to talk about the future, to plan and organize. You acted like just showing up and putting in the hours made you a good husband. She was practically spitting the words, her anger rising. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless for a moment. She was blaming me for her cheating, for her deception, as if she had no choice but to turn me into her personal joke. You think I've just been putting in hours? I asked, my voice low but shaking. I've spent years thinking of our life, making decisions with you in mind, trying to build something real for us. And you turned it into a joke, Claire. A game. She rolled her eyes, exasperated. Well, maybe I didn't ask for all of that, okay? Maybe I didn't want the pressure of being someone's everything. She made air quotes around the word, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Maybe I wanted to feel like me for a change. And Trent? He made me feel like that. Her words hit like a slap. This wasn't just betrayal. It was as if she was tearing down every bit of meaning I'd attached to our relationship. My love, my loyalty, everything I'd given her. None of it mattered. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. I could feel my hands shaking, my heart pounding with the mixture of hurt and rage I couldn't contain any longer. You've built this story in your head where you're some victim in our marriage, trapped by my boring love, and you really believe it, don't you? She shrugged, that same casual indifference back on her face. Believe what you want. I'll find somewhere to go tonight, but don't expect me to apologize for doing what I needed to do. For a moment, I felt hollow, like the floor had dropped out from under me, and everything we'd built together had fallen through with it. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the Claire I'd loved and trusted. She was someone else entirely, someone who didn't care about the pain she'd caused, who felt nothing but contempt for the life we'd built. With one final look, she grabbed her keys and purse, turning toward the door without a second glance. As she walked out, it was clear. She was leaving not because I asked her to, but because she wanted to, because she had no intention of facing what she'd done or even pretending to care. And in that moment, I knew that whatever we'd had was gone. There was no repairing it, no talking it through. I stood there in the empty house, the silence so thick it was almost buzzing. The door had barely closed behind her, but it felt like an earthquake had torn through the place. The reality of it all was setting in, pressing down on me. The woman I'd built a life with had just walked out, leaving behind nothing but her twisted mockery of our marriage. My mind started spiraling through everything, trying to understand how I'd missed it all. How long had she been thinking this way, seeing me not as her partner but as some roadblock in her life? I felt like a fool, replaying every dinner date, every quiet morning, all the times I'd asked her how she was feeling, if there was anything she wanted to talk about. She'd always shrugged it off, told me I was overthinking things, that everything was fine. The word made my skin crawl. She'd used it to keep me placated, to throw me off. How many times had she called me paranoid when I noticed something was off? The memories started rushing in now, each one more painful than the last. Like the night I'd asked her why she was coming home so late all of a sudden, and she'd snapped, saying I was being controlling and obsessive. Or the weekend she canceled our anniversary plans last minute because she'd forgotten she had a work conference. And I, in my desperate trust, had believed her. I walked over to the laptop, still open to that cursed folder. I stared at it, the words blurring as my mind raced. I clicked through the messages again, each one a fresh stab in an already open wound. I wasn't sure why I kept looking. Maybe I thought there'd be some explanation, some clue that would make this hurt a little less. But no, every line was a reminder of just how calculated she'd been, how deliberately she'd kept me in the dark while she laughed at me behind my back. Then I saw it, a draft email that caught my eye, dated just 2 days ago. The subject line read, "To-do list," and in it, she'd written a chilling checklist. Confirm weekend with Trent. Tell him I'm at a work retreat. Make sure he thinks everything is okay. I sat back, the weight of it crushing me. She'd planned it all, even down to the smallest lie, like I was just some fool in the background of her story. Everything about her betrayal was meticulous, cold, and utterly heartless. It felt like there was no air left in the room, and I got up, pacing just to try to feel like I was still connected to reality. My hands shook with the rage simmering inside me, the feeling of helplessness twisting deeper with every step. How could she do this? How could she look at me every day, listen to me, laugh with me, let me think we were building something real, only to shatter it all like this? Suddenly, I couldn't stand to be in that house any longer. It felt haunted, every room filled with memories that felt too painful to look at now. I grabbed my keys, storming out the door, not knowing where I was headed. Just knowing I needed to get away from the wreckage of what I'd thought was my life. I drove for miles, aimless, not even caring where I was going. The roads blurred past me, streetlights streaking in the rain. I couldn't shake the image of Claire's face as she'd walked out, that mixture of irritation and defiance. She'd never looked back, not once, like none of this mattered to her, like I didn't matter. Eventually, I pulled into the empty parking lot of a grocery store, the rain drumming on the roof of the car as if matching the chaos in my head. I turned off the engine, letting the silence settle. It was too quiet, almost eerie, and in that moment, the weight of everything crashed down on me. How had it come to this? How had I become so blind to the truth? My mind was a mess of memories, sharp and painful, a puzzle I was struggling to make sense of. I replayed the past months, looking for signs, cracks, anything I could have missed. All those times she'd been too busy for date nights, the sudden work trips, the private phone calls. She'd given me just enough reassurance to make me think everything was fine, all while she was slowly tearing down the life we'd built together. And the way she'd taunted me about it, throwing every accusation back at me. You're the boring one. You're too predictable. It was like she'd written a script just to convince me that I was the problem, so she'd never have to face what she was doing. I trusted her so deeply that I'd blamed myself for every moment I doubted her. I felt like a fool for believing in her, for fighting so hard to keep our marriage strong while she was finding every excuse to tear it apart. The worst part, though, was realizing just how intentional her betrayal had been. She hadn't slipped up. She'd crafted it all with that damn folder, a roadmap to keep me in the dark. It was almost sickeningly impressive in its detail. The way she'd thought out every possible suspicion I could have, planned every excuse down to the exact words to say. I closed my eyes, feeling a surge of anger that made my hands clench around the steering wheel. How could she treat me like this, like some pawn in her twisted game? How could she have so little respect, so little regard for the years we'd spent together? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the anger was like a storm. I knew I had to make a decision about what to do next, about what kind of man I was going to be after all this. I could confront her again, demand answers, tear into her for every lie she told. Or I could step back, let her think she'd won, and plan my next move carefully. The thought of letting her get away with it felt unbearable. But so did the idea of wasting another second of my life on someone so unworthy of trust. She'd robbed me of the life I thought we were building together. But she wasn't going to rob me of my dignity, too. As the rain continued to pour down, I realized something. I was done with Claire. Done with the lies, the games, the endless twisting of reality to suit her whims. She could keep her twisted fantasies, her excitement with Trent, and every fake word she'd ever said to me. I was ready to cut her out of my life, but I knew I'd have to do it in a way that left her no more room to manipulate, no more room to turn this back on me. For the first time that night, a strange calm settled over me. I knew what I had to do. I'd go home, I'd gather my evidence, and then I'd call a lawyer. This wouldn't be a fight. This would be the cleanest, coldest exit I could make, and she'd see exactly how predictable I could be when I was done with her lies. That I drove home with a new purpose, a clarity I hadn't felt in hours. The rain had let up, leaving the night quiet and still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. When I walked into the house, it felt different. No longer haunted, just empty, like I could finally see through every illusion she'd built here. I was done holding on to a ghost, done trying to salvage something that had been dead long before I'd realized it. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and went straight back to that folder. This time, I wasn't looking to understand or to feel anything. I was collecting every last piece of evidence, making sure I had the full picture. Every message, every meeting, every ridiculous detail Claire had so smugly documented. I compiled it all. The receipts for her trips with Trent, the calendar events she'd carefully labeled as work, even the checklist of lies she'd kept for herself. There was no way she'd talk her way out of this. No, it was just a phase, or we can work through it. I knew that when I confronted her again, it wouldn't be with anger, but with an unbreakable case for why this was over. And I'd make sure that when I left her, it would sting. Once I had everything, I sent copies of the folder to a secure drive, just in case she somehow tried to access the laptop later. I wasn't giving her a single chance to manipulate the situation, to turn this into some story of her being misunderstood or overwhelmed. She'd made it clear that she didn't care about anything but her own satisfaction, her own thrill. I was done letting her treat me like a fool. Next, I started looking up lawyers, making notes on names and numbers. I didn't know exactly what I wanted out of this divorce yet, but I knew one thing. I'd make it as clean and swift as possible. I wasn't going to drag this out, and I wasn't going to give her an inch. She'd chosen her path, and she could have it. All of it far away from me. And just as I was wrapping things up, I heard her car pull into the driveway. I didn't expect her back so soon. I figured she'd stay out to avoid the fallout. But no, she walked right in, heels clicking against the hardwood, her face neutral, almost businesslike, as if she was coming home from an average day. She barely glanced at me as she headed for the hallway, but I cleared my throat, and she turned, raising an eyebrow. "Oh," she said with a shrug, Still here. Her indifference was almost comical. I fought the urge to laugh at the absurdity of it. Here she was, waltzing back in like nothing had happened, like we hadn't just shredded our entire life apart. It was as if she assumed I'd accept it all and move on, that I'd simply roll over like the predictable husband she'd mocked in her messages. "I'm here," I replied calmly. "Just like you're about to be gone. For good." Her smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by a look of mild surprise. "Are we really doing this now?" she asked, feigning exasperation. "I thought you'd calm down by now. I was giving you space." The gall of it. She honestly thought she could waltz back in and play this off. "Calm down," I replied, my voice steady. "Claire, I've been more than calm. In fact, I'm completely done." I watched as her face shifted, the confidence cracking ever so slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her tone sharper, less assured than before. "It means I have every piece of evidence I need," I replied, holding her gaze, watching the reality sink in. "I have the messages, the photos, your twisted little instructions on how to keep me in the dark. I've got enough here to make sure this divorce is swift and clean, with no chance for you to spin this into anything else." She opened her mouth to respond, but for the first time, she looked caught off guard, like she hadn't anticipated I'd be this direct, this final. For a split second, Claire's mask cracked, her smugness slipping as she processed what I'd said. Her eyes darted from me to the laptop on the table, as if she could somehow see through the screen to the folder full of her secrets. Then, almost as quickly, her face hardened, the defiance flooding back in full force. She crossed her arms and let out a scoff, her lips curling in disdain. "So what, you're just going to throw our marriage away because of a few mistakes?" she said, her tone cold and mocking. "Go ahead. Get your evidence together. See if I care." She raised her chin, trying to regain the upper hand. Her eyes narrowed as if challenging me. "Claire, I'm not throwing anything away," I replied, staying calm. "You did that a long time ago. I'm just making it official." She rolled her eyes, but I could see the flicker of panic beneath her bravado. "Oh, please, like you're such a saint. Always playing the perfect husband. Acting like you're so innocent. Maybe if you'd been more interesting, more spontaneous, I wouldn't have needed someone like Trent." Her words were laced with venom, each one calculated to hurt, to break me down. But this time, her words had no effect. The person she was talking to, the person she thought she could manipulate, could crush with a few cutting remarks, was gone. I'd let her hurt me once, but now, her insults felt empty, like static in the background. She was trying to wield the same weapons that had once worked, but they had no edge left. I just stared at her, unmoved. "Spontaneous," I replied, tilting my head. "You mean like lying, sneaking around, building a second life behind someone's back? That's what you call excitement?" I shook my head, almost pitying her. "Claire, if that's the life you want, go ahead. But you won't be living it with me." For the first time, I saw a flash of uncertainty in her eyes, a flicker of realization that I wasn't playing along anymore. I was a step ahead of her, done with her excuses and mind games. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came out, her confidence finally shaken. She took a deep breath, her posture shifting as she softened her tone, trying a different approach. "Look, maybe we rushed into all this, okay? Maybe I just got overwhelmed. But I don't think this has to end. We can talk about it, go to therapy or something. People work through things like this all the time." It was almost laughable watching her switch gears like that, as if she could just rewrite the story when it suited her. But I was done being part of her script. "Therapy?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Claire, therapy doesn't fix this. You planned this. You enjoyed this. You laughed at me, at everything we built, like it was some kind of game." I leaned forward, meeting her gaze with a resolve she couldn't dodge. "I'll be talking to a lawyer in the morning. I don't need to work through anything with you. It's over." The impact of those words hit her like a punch. She took a step back, as if the finality of it was just now sinking in. For the first time, her face betrayed real fear, her smugness replaced by a look of raw vulnerability. "But we've been together for years," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper now. "We built a life together. You can't just throw that away just like that." I'm not throwing anything away. Claire? I replied, standing up, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders as I said the words. You already did. I walked past her, heading toward the bedroom, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This time, I was leaving her behind in every way that mattered. I was done letting her twist our life into something unrecognizable. As I reached the hallway, I heard her voice one last time, small, almost desperate, calling after me. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The bedroom was dark, silent except for my own footsteps, and for the first time since all of this had begun, I felt a sense of control return. I closed the door behind me, blocking out the sound of Claire's faint protests. Her voice finally muffled and distant. I couldn't believe it had come to this point. Couldn't believe that the person I'd loved, shared my life with, was now nothing more than a stranger on the other side of the door. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and started packing, tossing clothes into it without a second thought. I didn't care what I took, just that I took enough to be out of this place. I'd come back later to deal with the rest, once things were more settled. Right now, all I wanted was space, a clean slate, somewhere her lies and betrayal couldn't touch me. Halfway through packing, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. For a second, I considered ignoring it, assuming it was Claire's latest attempt at manipulation. But when I pulled it out, I saw it wasn't her. It was my best friend, Alex. I hadn't told him what was happening yet. Part of me had been too ashamed, too hurt to say the words out loud. But now I needed someone to ground me. I picked up the call, barely getting out a hey before Alex's voice broke through. Concerned. Man, where are you? He asked, his tone serious. I just got off work, and I had this gut feeling something was wrong. You good? For a moment I couldn't speak. The reality of it all hit me again. Harder now that I had someone on the other end of the line who actually cared, who didn't see me as some pawn in their game. I took a shaky breath, steadying myself. No, Alex, I finally said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. I'm not good. Claire, she's been cheating on me for months, and it's like she enjoyed it, like she planned out the whole thing just to make me feel like an idiot. There was silence on the line for a moment as he processed what I just said. Then I heard him curse under his breath, his voice heavy with anger and disbelief. You've got to be kidding me, Claire? After everything? Man, I don't even know what to say. Neither do I admitted, feeling a strange relief in saying it out loud. She's been so smug about it, like this was some game to her. She walked out tonight, told me she wanted excitement, and when I told her I was done, she acted like I was throwing her away. Alex sighed, his voice firm. Listen, you're doing the right thing by leaving. You don't need someone like that, someone who thinks loyalty is a game. You deserve better than this, man. Way better. Hearing his words, I felt a new strength settle over me. I wasn't alone in this. I had people who saw me for who I was, who actually respected me, even if the person I trusted most had turned her back on me. Thanks, man, I said, feeling the weight lift just a little. I'm packing my stuff now. I'll figure out where to go tomorrow. But for tonight, I just need to get out of here. Come to my place, he offered without hesitation. Stay as long as you need. We'll get you set up, and we'll figure out the next steps together. You don't have to go through this alone. I felt a sense of relief, a warmth that broke through the anger and hurt. I didn't have to face this by myself. I had people who had my back, who'd be there to help me pick up the pieces. And in that moment, I knew that leaving wasn't just the right choice. It was the only choice. Thanks, Alex. I'll be over soon, I replied, hanging up and finishing the last of my packing with a newfound determination. As I zipped up the suitcase, I took one final look around the bedroom. Every memory, every shared moment, felt distant, hollow now. This room, this house, it wasn't home anymore. Not after what she'd done. With a steady breath, I picked up my things and walked out, passing the living room where Claire still stood, watching me with wide, unreadable eyes. Where are you going? She asked, her voice wavering, a hint of panic slipping through her usual cold demeanor. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an answer. I just opened the door, stepped into the cool night air, and closed it behind me. The cold night air hit me like a wake-up call, a rush of clarity that I hadn't felt in what seemed like days. I took a deep breath, letting the chill sink in, letting it wash away the last remnants of my anger and confusion. I was leaving for real. Whatever life I'd thought I had with Claire was over, and out here, away from the stifling walls of that house, I finally felt the weight begin to lift. I threw my suitcase in the back seat, got in the car, and just sat there for a moment, watching the dark windows of the house I'd called home. I half expected Claire to come storming out, to yell something, to try to turn this back around like she always did, but there was only silence. And as strange as it felt, I didn't feel any urge to go back. This time I was finally free. As I drove through the quiet streets toward Alex's place, the events of the night replayed in my mind. I kept thinking back to every single moment, every harsh word Claire had thrown at me, every careless smile, every excuse I'd convinced myself to believe. It was like pieces of a twisted puzzle falling into place, each memory revealing the depth of her betrayal. I was amazed at how long I'd been blind, how easily she'd manipulated me. It made me sick, but it also gave me the strength to keep driving, to keep moving away from her. I pulled into Alex's driveway just as he stepped outside, arms crossed, his face shadowed but unmistakably angry. He opened the car door before I even got out and pulled me into a tight hug, which was as much a surprise as it was a relief. He wasn't a big hugger and neither was I, but right then, it was exactly what I needed. "She's an idiot, you know that?" he said, pulling back, his voice rough with anger. "She had something real with you, and she threw it all away for what? A cheap thrill? A laugh? Man, I can't even wrap my head around it." I nodded, feeling that anger burn through me again, but this time with Alex there, it felt manageable. "I don't know either. She made it all feel like it was my fault, like I wasn't enough, like she needed more than I could give." I shook my head, realizing how much I'd fallen for her story. And all this time, I believed her. He looked me square in the eye, his face set, his voice firm. "Listen to me. You're the last person who should feel at fault here. She messed with you, twisted things, made you question yourself so she could feel better about what she was doing. That's on her, not you." There was a weight in his words, a truth I'd been too blinded by hurt to see. Alex was right. I'd spent months, maybe even years, bending myself backward to make her happy, to be the man I thought she needed. But nothing would have ever been enough, because she'd never been honest with me, or with herself. I'd been living in the version of our life that she'd crafted, a version that only existed so long as I stayed in the dark. "Thanks, man," I finally said, my voice low, "for letting me stay here, for everything." He clapped me on the shoulder, his expression softening. "You'd do the same for me. Besides, this is just the beginning. Tomorrow we get you set up with a lawyer, figure out what you need to do to make this clean. You don't deserve to be dragged through her mess." The words felt like a lifeline. I wasn't alone in this. There was a way forward, a way out that didn't end with me defeated. I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving the person who'd built that life on lies and manipulation. It wouldn't be easy, but in that moment, with Alex's support, I knew I'd make it through this. I was finally reclaiming my life, one small step at a time. As I settled in for the night on Alex's couch, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling, I realized something. I'd just closed a chapter, and in the quiet, away from the chaos, I could almost feel the freedom of the next one waiting for me. A blank page ready to be filled. The morning light crept through the blinds, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I woke up without that heavy, suffocating weight on my chest. The anger, the betrayal, it was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it felt different now, clearer somehow. I crossed a line last night that I knew I couldn't, and wouldn't go back on. As I sat up, Alex was already in the kitchen, brewing a pot of coffee and clattering around in his usual, chaotic way. He glanced up when he saw me, giving a nod, half amused, half concerned. "Morning, man. You sleep at all?" he asked, pouring me a cup and sliding it across the counter. "A little," I admitted, taking a long sip and letting the coffee warm me up. "Didn't think I'd be able to, but yeah, well, you're gonna need it. I made some calls this morning," he said, his tone shifting into something more serious. "My cousin referred me to a lawyer, someone who specializes in handling situations like yours." I nodded, already feeling the enormity of what lay ahead. A divorce. Splitting assets. Cutting her out of my life cleanly. For good. I had no idea what to expect from the process, but if there was one thing I knew, it was that I couldn't let Claire twist this around. Couldn't let her somehow turn this into another game. I wanted it clean. Final. An hour later, I was sitting across from a no-nonsense lawyer named Linda. A woman with sharp eyes and a sharper voice who wasted no time getting to the point. She sat across from me with a pen poised over her legal pad, her gaze assessing. "So," she began, flipping through the notes I'd sent her, including all the evidence from Claire's folder. "First off, I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but it's good you gathered this much. It gives us something solid to work with." I nodded, still feeling the sting of seeing those messages and photos laid out like evidence in a case. "I want this to be quick, clean. No unnecessary fights, no drama," I said, the resolve clear in my voice. Linda raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "I understand, but a clean divorce depends on both parties being cooperative. From what you've told me about Claire, she may not be as willing to make this easy." I felt a wave of frustration but forced myself to stay calm. "She's not going to make it easy, but I don't want anything from her. She can keep the house. I just want out." Linda nodded, taking a note. "That's one way to handle it, but be prepared. Often in cases like this, when one person walks away, the other tries to dig in. She may fight over assets just to keep you in her orbit, to keep control." I took a deep breath, the reality sinking in. Claire might resist simply because she hated losing, because the idea of me leaving on my own terms didn't fit into her story. But the thought only solidified my determination. I wasn't giving her a single foothold back into my life. Linda continued, "We'll proceed carefully. I'll file the papers as soon as possible. In the meantime, I need you to prepare yourself. She'll likely retaliate, maybe with insults, guilt trips, or claims that you're overreacting. Stay focused on the facts and leave emotion out of it as much as you can." I nodded, feeling the weight of her advice settle in. It was simple but powerful. Focus on the facts. Leave emotion out of it. Claire's lies and manipulation had controlled me long enough. This time I'd keep my head clear and my goals simple. I'd fight, but on my terms. As I left the lawyer's office, a strange feeling washed over me. A mixture of relief and resolve. I was on a path now, one that led far away from the games and betrayals, from the life I'd shared with Claire. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I was ready to find out. On the drive back to Alex's, I felt the full impact of what I was about to do. Filing for divorce felt like stepping onto a new path, one that meant finally letting go of the life I'd thought I was building with Claire. It was equal parts liberating and terrifying. But every time doubt crept in, every time I questioned if I was doing the right thing, all I had to do was remember the smirk on her face, her mocking tone as she'd brushed off her lies. That was all the reminder I needed. Alex was waiting for me at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone when I walked in. He looked up and gave me an approving nod, clearly proud that I'd taken the next step. "How'd it go?" "Good," I said, exhaling slowly as I dropped my keys on the counter. "She's getting the papers ready. Linda, the lawyer, she's solid. She warned me that Claire might make this harder than it needs to be." Alex smirked, shaking his head. "Of course she will. She's been trying to control everything this whole time, so she's not about to let you walk out without some kind of power play." The idea of Claire scrambling to regain control, to keep herself at the center of my life even as we split, didn't surprise me. It only steeled my resolve. But even as I thought about it, my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced down at the screen and saw her name flash across it. "Speak of the devil," Alex muttered, eyeing my phone. "She's probably panicking. You sure you want to answer that?" For a moment I hesitated. I could just ignore her, let her spiral on her own. But part of me wanted to hear what she had to say now that I'd made my intentions clear. I grabbed the phone, giving Alex a nod before stepping out to the front porch. I picked up, keeping my tone neutral. "Claire." She was silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice strained, forced into a brittle sweetness that sounded almost foreign. "I just got your lawyer's email," she said, pausing as if expecting me to jump in. "When I didn't," she continued, "you're really going through with this. You're just giving up." I gripped the phone tighter, fighting the urge to laugh at the irony of her words. "Giving up?" I repeated, keeping my tone steady. Claire, I'm not giving up. I'm finally seeing things clearly. You did everything you could to throw this away, and now you're just mad I won't play along anymore. She scoffed, the mask slipping as she dropped the fake sweetness. So you're going to let one mistake ruin everything we've built? I made one bad choice, and now you're acting like I'm some kind of monster. One mistake, I said, unable to hold back the disbelief in my voice. Claire, this wasn't one mistake. This was months of lies, of treating me like a fool, laughing behind my back. You wrote out a whole manual on how to manipulate me. You turned our life into a joke. Her tone sharpened, a hint of anger seeping through. Oh, please, don't act like you're perfect. You were so caught up in being the good husband, the predictable one, that you barely even saw me. You were always so focused on the future, on building something, that you didn't see what was happening right in front of you. I let her words sink in, the twisted logic she'd built to justify her actions. But this time, her accusations felt hollow, weak. She could try to turn this on me all she wanted, but I wasn't falling for it. Maybe I was focused on the future, I replied, my voice calm. Because I thought we had won. Because I thought we were on the same team. But it turns out you were busy building something else. So, no, I'm not giving up. I'm finally doing what I should have done the moment I found that folder. There was silence on the other end, and for a second I almost thought she'd hung up. But then she spoke, her tone icy. Fine, if this is what you want, I'll let the lawyers handle it. But don't expect me to make this easy for you. You want it out? You'll get out, but on my terms. Her voice was cold, calculating, and I knew exactly what she meant. She'd fight. She'd push. She'd do everything she could to make sure I paid for leaving her. But instead of feeling fear, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was done with her games, and nothing she threw at me now could hurt me the way her betrayal already had. Do whatever you need to do, Claire, I said quietly. I'm ready for whatever comes next. I ended the call, letting the silence settle around me. The battle was just beginning, and I could feel the storm she was ready to unleash. But for the first time, I was ready too. As I hung up, I felt a finality settle over me. A calm unlike anything I'd felt since this nightmare began. Claire's threats, her manipulation, even her anger, they were all just echoes now. I'd let her words tear me apart once, but now they bounced off like empty noise, unable to touch the place where I'd finally found my resolve. I walked back inside, where Alex looked up, reading my face with one sharp glance. How'd it go? He asked, already sounding like he knew the answer. She said she'd fight it, make it hard for me. She's not going to let me go easily. I shrugged, realizing how little that actually mattered to me. But I don't care. She can fight all she wants. It doesn't change a thing for me. Alex nodded, his face a mix of empathy and pride. Good. That's how you win this, Not by playing her games, but by refusing to let her drag you into them. Just keep going. You've got this. We spent the next few days meeting with lawyers, gathering documents, and setting up the logistics to untangle my life from hers as quickly as possible. And with every step I took, every signature and phone call, the weight lifted just a little more. I was putting distance between us, but more than that, I was rebuilding my sense of self, of who I was without her shadow looming over me. Claire, as expected, tried to retaliate. She sent angry texts at all hours, accusing me of abandoning her, of throwing everything away. She was relentless, using every tool she had to try to get a reaction. But the more she pushed, the more I saw her desperation, her need to control the narrative and keep herself at the center of my life, even now. But I'd found something she couldn't touch: peace. The sense that I was finally done trying to understand, trying to fix something that had been broken long before I'd known it. Every nasty message, every accusation, felt like the last fading cries of a story I'd outgrown. One evening, as I was packing the last of my things from her house, I came across a small box tucked away in a drawer. Inside were mementos from the early days of our relationship. A photo of us from our first trip, movie tickets, a crumpled, handwritten note she'd once left on my car. It felt like looking at strangers, a memory that didn't even belong to me anymore. I realized that the version of her I'd loved had only ever existed in my mind. The real Claire had been someone else, someone I could never know, and no amount of memories or keepsakes could change that. I closed the box, set it aside, and continued packing, leaving behind everything that didn't serve my new life. The day the divorce was finalized, Alex and I went out to mark the end of this chapter. He raised a glass, clinking it against mine, a grin on his face. To new beginnings, and to freedom from, well, you know. I laughed, something I hadn't done in weeks, and raised my glass. To moving on, I said, feeling those words sink in, freeing me a little more with each syllable. As I sipped my drink, I felt the weight of the past fall away, piece by piece. Claire was gone, her lies a distant echo, her games a lesson I'd carry forward, but no longer a burden on my heart. I was free, standing at the beginning of a new chapter, with blank pages waiting to be filled. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time I didn't need to. I was ready to face it, one steady step at a time, finally moving towards something real.